Tilda. Lies, stupidity, and damage control. I think that's pretty much everything we're going to be talking about today. So in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating to our favourite salad fingers impersonator that damage control done after the fact does not necessarily disprove the fact. So let's get stuck right on in there, shall we?
So first up is Tilda's video. Now, I recently made a video about Tilda, which he didn't appear to like much, I think it's fair to say. Apparently the video of his that I chose to respond to was released too long ago, and I quote, "People like H-Bomber-Guy, Bad Mouse Productions, and Sean and Jen always dig out the oldest stuff possible because they don't have the balls to go after anything later than the early months of 2015, when I made a conscious effort to move away from humour into doing basically nothing other than raw data analysis and research." Now first off, Tilda, badmouth me if you want, I can handle it. Badmouth Jen if you want, she deserves it, but don't you dare badmouth H-Bomber-Guy. He's too pure and good for the likes of you. You're not even fit to say his name.
I'm just going to bring this up here because it's a really minor point, but it kind of sets the tone for how this guy performs pretty much all of his argumentation. So let's look at that little screen grab that you've got going on there, shall we? And what's that in the top left? Oh yeah, that's the bottom of the Hide Replies tab. Now, why would that be important here? Well, it's just important because my mentioning of H-Bomber-Guy here clearly seems to have upset you a little bit, and apparently it upset him as well, because for some reason he felt the need to send a screen cap of this comment to me on Twitter. Apparently he doesn't understand what "my account is automated" means. It means I don't actually look at it, but this tweet was highlighted to me by someone because they found it interesting as to why he was doing this. Well, it turns out when you read the original comment, you know, the one that I'm replying to, the one which you intentionally left off of your screenshot, they mention him first. This is why, in my grammar here, you'll note I say "people like." But apparently that phrase seems to have gone over your head and over H-Bomber-Guy's head as well. Using this as an example doesn't necessitate that he's addressed me or I've addressed him directly. To phrase it in a way that I think you'll understand, Sean, you'll notice I've put a word in there. You see, I gave myself an out. What happened there, Sean, was that I was smarter than you. I mean, that's not really something to brag about. Frankly, at this point in time, I think a walnut could outsmart you. But I just thought that was something interesting to bring up, especially since it requires you intentionally cutting part out of what you're dealing with, because you do that later on in this video, and it's actually really important, the bit that you cut out. But I'll let you witter on and we'll get there shortly. It just still amuses me that when you intentionally cut context from a sentence, you end up causing someone who you apparently seem to like a deal of upset. See, if only you provided all of the context around that quote, this wouldn't have happened. You did this, Sean. You did this.
So anyway, I thought I'd mention that this video I'm responding to was published on the 12th of May 2016, which is a full year into Tilda's supposed raw data analysis and research phase. Just keep that in mind as we go forward. So then, let's go over the lead up to this video. An author called Megan Foy wrote a novel called Me-ternity about a woman who fakes her own pregnancy in order to take time off from her busy and stressful job. So like a me-ternity leave instead of a maternity leave, yeah. And I've not read it, but I presume the main character goes on to learn some sort of lesson about life or whatever. It looks like a standard airport bookstore book, you know.
Now this is your first mistake. You are presuming too much, and I'll go on to demonstrate why later. But it's interesting that you're just using an assumption here as though it's some sort of point, but again, we'll cover this later. I just want everyone to remember that you have admitted you haven't read this book.
So then, Megan Foy has wrote her Me-ternity novel, and she's doing press for it, and she agrees to do an article for the New York Post, which is entitled, "I Want All the Perks of Maternity Leave Without Having Any Kids," which seems like a bit of a confusing, clickbaity tabloid news title there. Now, Megan Foy wrote a novel in which a fictional character held that opinion, but does she also hold the opinion? Now, the sharp-eyed among you will have already noticed that this article was not written by Megan Foy, it was written by a journalist called Anna Davies. You see, this is an as-told-to story. It's Anna Davies' interpretation of Megan Foy's ideas. Megan Foy didn't write this article, and it's highly unlikely she ever actually said this headline.
Now that is correct. This article is not written by Megan Foy. However, let me scroll down a little bit from that part that you've screenshotted. Megan Foy, 38, was jealous of co-workers clocking out for maternity leave and decided she needed a break of her own. Here, the author of the novel, Me-ternity, tells the Post's Anna Davis why she believes every woman deserves mandated me-time. So this is an interview. Some of this is being quoted. Now, you're quite correct that the title doesn't have quote marks around it, so the odds are Megan didn't say this. However, other parts of this article do have quotes around them. And then the other parts are presumably still going to be based on things that she said during the interview. Now, while there will be some artistic license on part of the author there, that does not then instantly absolve Megan of all responsibility of everything published in the article. This article, after all, couldn't have been written in such a way if there wasn't at least some indication of something along these lines within that interview. But there's an important timeline of events here, and we'll get to that again a little bit later on, because it's kind of important, and I want Sean to get all of his points out of the way before I demonstrate pretty resoundingly why he's wrong.
And as it turns out, if we read the article, it's clear Megan Foy is not angrily demanding mandated me time. She's just talking generally about work-life balance and the importance of taking time off every once in a while. Indeed, what she considers her own me-ternity is just a year-long holiday she undertook voluntarily, with no pay, in order to write her novel. This is something lots of people do, including, for instance, Anna Davies, whose earliest archived article on NewYorkPost.com is about her taking a year off from work in order to backpack around Europe. Anyway, a lot of people fell for this clickbait headline, and there was a lot of backlash from people, parents especially, who felt that Megan Foy was comparing maternity leave to some sort of fun holiday. And so the day after the New York Post article, Megan Foy posted a clarification on her own website. The article in the Post surrounding my novel Me-ternity has stirred up some controversy based on the book's title and storyline. Me-ternity is a term I made up to tell a fictional story about a working woman who fakes a pregnancy. It was not meant to disparage maternity in any way. Please understand, I'm not saying maternity leave is a sabbatical or saying the two are anywhere near the same thing. I have great respect for mums and know from many of my friends about the sleepless nights and adjustments that are made with a newborn. I'm all for parents having flexible schedules. We all win when we support each other in the workforce. And well, there we go. That appears to clear that controversy up. And now, this article is clearly visible on the author's homepage, so, for instance, if you're someone making a YouTube video about it 2 weeks after this was published, a standard Google search of the author's name would turn it up. And one more point before we get to TLDR, actually, I'll say, as a bit of a writer myself, and knowing, one or two things about narrative structure, that if I had to take a guess, I'd say that the protagonist of the novel Me-ternity probably finds out that taking a maternity leave isn't as easy as she thinks at the beginning of the novel. You know, wanting all the perks of something without the downsides is a good starting point for a character in a novel, but then there's probably a story after that. You know, her taking a me-ternity is probably not the conclusion of the novel, I assume.
Well, we've got pretty much everything we need to understand Sean's position here. Megan didn't really mean what she was saying. It was just the New York Post's writer who took her out of context and twisted what she said to make it into something completely different. Now I'm going to enter the fact into this that Sean hasn't read this book. So what better way to demonstrate why he is wrong than reading the book? So he asserts that, well, he's pretty sure that the ending of the book is going to have some sort of moral or something like that. You know, the me-ternity isn't going to be the be-all and end-all. Well, let's just read the epilogue, shall we? You know, that final part of the book that winds everything up nicely with a bow on it, shall we? Epilogue. I was running late to the airport, but I wasn't worried. I wanted to get the latest issue of Paddy Cakes with my story in it. I'd gone back and forth with Alex for the past month, making sure I got all the gritty details of the life of a pregnant woman in the workplace pitch perfect. Me-ternity, the secret life of a pregnant magazine editor, was the first story in the well, and the biggest line on the cover. It had already made a story on the Today Show. where Cynthia went on to talk about how patty cakes represented the changing face of maternity benefits in the workplace. It was excellent PR for the magazine, and for the company as a whole. There was talk of my story being submitted for the National Magazine Awards in December, but at that point, I'd be in Phuket, lounging on the beach and developing the Fair Trade Families app. My Ray-Bans perched on the top of my head. I looked at myself in the taxi window as I slammed the door shut, grabbed my single roller bag, liking the feeling of my new workwear, a leather motorcycle jacket, gypsy scarf, jeans and Pumas. The lines in my forehead had seemed to vanish overnight, and the golden streaks in my hair had come out after a weekend trip to Miami to write at Cynthia's house on Star Island. I smile, thinking that I never expected things, especially the guy waiting for me at the bag check-in spot, to turn out this way. "Why hello, Miss Buckley." "Why hello, Mr. Murphy," I say, looking at how hot my fellow traveller looks standing there at the terminal with his own backpack. "Of all the terminals in all the airports in this city, you had to show up here." "You know, I think this is going to be the start of a beautiful friendship," I say back. "I think you're right," Ryan says, leaning in for a kiss before taking my hand as we take our seats on the last Air France flight of the night. We'll be touching down in Marrakesh, but not before a few nights overlay in Paris. I rifle through my bag, this time sure I'll make it through security. The only sign of maternity-related materials is a pregnancy test, yet to be taken. I think back to my treasure map analogy I made so many months ago before all this started. Maybe somewhere between pH algorithms, cat cubicledom, tiger momism, and French, there was one other option that many women often neglect to realize. Me-ternity, where you birth the exact life you want according to your dreams. It might take a miracle, but if you jump right in and you're honest about your wishes, eventually things will work themselves out in ways that you never could have expected. So that was the end of the story. So this story, as you might be gathering, is kind of a semi-autobiographical fantasy. The author, in real life, works at a magazine where everyone is getting pregnant and thinks, oh, wouldn't it be great if I staged a pregnancy and got time off just like all the pregnant women? But in reality, she never goes through with that plan. In the book, however, a blonde woman working at a magazine fantasizes about getting time off like all of the pregnant women, lies about getting pregnant, and then... oh yeah, she gets a writing contract, her book Me-ternity, which the fictional author writes in the book as well, becomes a bestseller, so she becomes a really famous author and gets to go all around the world with these handsome men to exotic places. You see, Sean, this book is pretty much a projected fantasy of the author. It's what she wishes she could do and what she wishes would happen. This is the first tip-off that suggests to me that this might be something that she's actually kind of serious about. At least in some capacity anyway. But here's the other cool thing. At the end of this book, there's actually a little Q&A with the author. Question: why did you want to write a book about a single woman who fakes being pregnant? Megan's answer: it was born out of simple frustration, jealousy, and burnout. When my 3 closest friends announced they were pregnant and would be taking the summer off for maternity leave, it almost pushed me over the brink. I was nearly 31 and had been working like a dog for the past 8 years and wanted a maternity leave myself. Next question. Do you feel there's some injustice in the workplace for post-30 single women right now? How so? To which Megan's answer was, without meaning it, having a child is really the only excuse a woman can use to get out of regular working hours or to leave early. Single women don't have the same luxury and therefore can become the office secretaries, taking on the extra work and little clean-up projects and finishing up when the mothers of staff have a hard stop. No baby, no excuse not to work. So not to put too fine a point on it, she sounds pretty mad jelly. And as you can see, a direct quote from her in her own book, she wanted to have a maternity leave. But, you know, in order to get that, you have to be pregnant, and that's not something that she's got going for her. So you can see, Sean, this idea that she wants to have a maternity leave without getting pregnant is not something that just the evil author at the New York Post has made up. It's something that has come from what the author has said, not only in her interviews, but in the book. You know, the one that you didn't read. Now, the funny thing is, Megan actually gave a series of interviews at around about the end of April. Here is one which was published on the 29th of April in the Mirror, and you'll notice these have quote marks around them. These are things that Megan directly stated. 'Cause, you know, that's what quote marks mean. I was newly single after a long, sad breakup with my boyfriend in my 20s. Burned out from working 24/7 for 10 years, well, my whole life really, when 3 of my best friends all giddily announced they were pregnant on the very same night at supper club, and would all be taking maternity leave that summer, I wanted one too, without a baby at the end. Yes, I had always dreamed of marriage and motherhood, but I still wasn't ready. I needed some time off to figure out exactly what I really wanted to do with the rest of my life. A moment to breathe and create rather than continue on the burnout track. Then, not being quoted here, in desperation, Miss Foy turned to her best friend Weatherly, who said, quote, "You know what you need? You need a me-ternity leave," unquote. The book is the result. Try to cut this up as many ways as you want, Sean. She has outright stated that she wishes she could have a break from work, specifically because all of her friends were getting one because they were parents. And she thinks that she should have the same break too, even though she didn't want to have a child at the end of it. Black and white quotes from the author. Don't believe me? Well, how about this from her website, which you seem to think is the ultimate definitive source on all of this. Why I wrote a book about a woman who fakes being pregnant. I conceived Liz's character in an almost fever frenzy when I was 31 myself. I was newly single after a long, sad breakup to my boyfriend in my 20s, burned out from working 24/7 for 10 years. Well, my whole life really. When my 3 best friends all giddily announced they were pregnant on the very same night at supper club and would all be taking maternity leave that summer, I wanted one too, without a baby at the end. Yes, I had always dreamed of marriage and motherhood, but I still wasn't ready. I needed some time off to figure out exactly what I really wanted to do with the rest of my life. A moment to breathe and create rather than continue on the burnout track. And then the big idea occurred to me. Well, to my best friend, Weatherly. You know what you need? You need a me-ternity leave. Ha! I should fake being pregnant to get one. You should. How funny would that be? And the book you have in your hands is the result. Basically the same thing that was quoted in the previous article. Taken directly from her website, and if you look down at the bottom there, it's signed XO Meg. But, you know, she didn't want to take time off as if she was having a maternity leave without having a kid. She never tried to make it sound like maternity leave was some sort of holiday. No, of course she didn't. It was just a term that her friend created for taking a holiday as if you were pregnant when you weren't pregnant. And then she even says at the end of the article, I hope you have a chance to take your own #me-ternity before settling down. It's pretty clear to me that she is directly conflating the idea of maternity leave with a holiday. And that is the thing that got so many people's hackles up about this. She is basically stating she thinks maternity leave is a holiday and that she should have one too, even though she's not having a baby. If she wanted to just write about how people should take a sabbatical from work, you know, have a year off, work out if what you're doing is what you really want to do, she could have just done that. If she just wanted to write a fictional book about a woman who faked a pregnancy to get time off, she could have just done that and then made it abundantly clear in all of her articles and all of her interviews, this is a work of fiction. I was just sort of thinking, oh, what would it be like if someone faked their pregnancy to get time off? But no, she has quite clearly linked into this the idea that maternity leave is a holiday and she wants one too, without the pregnancy. That is the crucial element in this, and that is the part which annoyed so many people. It is the direct conflation between the fiction and her real life, and the jealousy that she felt towards her real-life co-workers. The link between all of this is undeniable, and yet you continue to try. So around the end of April, she gave a slew of interviews all along this same line, echoing what she wrote in the book. You know, the one that you didn't read, Sean. And then, after all of these interviews have been published, or on the same day that some of them are published, probably owing to time differences, she then publishes that article which you read on her website. So after, in her book and in her interviews, directly stating that she wishes she could have the equivalent of a maternity leave without having kids, she then suddenly has to go on damage control because she's getting reamed by people on the internet. And make no mistake, that is exactly what that blog post on her website is. Damage control. In fact, the extent of her damage control was so great and desperate that she bailed on an interview with Good Morning America on the morning that she was supposed to appear. You know, that really just sounds like the actions of someone who's really sure that people have just misunderstood what she said. 'Cause she didn't really mean to compare maternity leave to having a holiday or anything like that, despite the fact that that's what she wrote in the Q&A of her book and what she was telling everyone in interviews. That's not really what she meant. So she bailed on a TV appearance where people were going to ask her about that in order to write a blog post about it. Yeah, sure, that's totally legit.
Well now, what's this, Teal dear? I thought you'd moved away from the fat jokes. I was expecting, what was it? Basically nothing other than raw data analysis and research. You're not off to the best start, really.
Yeah, I'll admit, I'm just putting this little bit in here because I want to be a bit of a smug fuck towards this guy. 'Cause what can I say, I just like knowing that I can get under his skin this badly. Sean, did you notice I said, basically nothing other than? That doesn't mean entirely only this thing. I'm outlining a basic direction, which means there will be outliers. That's what that word basically is doing in that sentence. I am a literary genius. So back onto the topic, there's a very basic series of events here that happen in a very convenient chronological order. Megan Foy writes a book. Yes, that book is a work of fiction. However, that work of fiction is based on a fantasy about her own life. There is a reason why it is a book about a blonde woman working at a magazine surrounded by pregnant friends who wants to have some time off, just like her pregnant friends, and then goes on to become a best-selling author, jet-setting all around the world. It's because that's what the author wants to do in real life. She confirms this in the Q&A section of her own book, that you didn't read. She confirms this in multiple interviews, several of which are published on the 28th of April, and then the next day, on the 29th, where a few other interviews are being published saying the same thing, she backs out of a television interview and writes a damage-controlling blog post on her website. And in Sean's mind, that damage-controlling blog post totally overrides and disproves everything that came before it. In reality, no it doesn't. The best thing that it proves is that she has changed her position. And you know what? I'm totally fine with that. Anyone can change their mind or change their position on a topic at any time for whatever reason they like. What it does not prove is that she was not serious about all of the things that she said beforehand. Especially the things that got published in the Q&A section in the book, which was long before any of the controversy surrounding this book. Well, I do believe that's brought us to the end of this particular saga, so Sean, feel free to, ignore this video like you did the last one, because nothing says I've got a really strong conviction about my points like immediately adopting the fetal position and whimpering like a child as soon as you're challenged. Oh, and I'm sure your other half will bravely use the fact that I sped up your voice because you're a slow-talking motherfucker as an excuse to ignore the fact that you are objectively wrong again. I honestly didn't think this much cowardice could exist between two people, but apparently it can. Amazing.